Subscribe and tap the bell right now, today, before you go. Twice a day, we bring you the real code of the samurai, not paraphrased, never softened. Politeness gets treated today as something close to the opposite of strength, a softness you fall back on when you can't afford to push back, drop the moment you actually have the power not to bother. Bushido inverted that assumption entirely. Inazo Nitobe places politeness among the core virtues of the samurai class specifically because the men most capable of ignoring it, the ones armed and legally protected from consequences most people never had to worry about, were the ones held to it most rigorously rather than exempted from it by their own strength. The clearest place this inversion shows up in actual samurai practice is in how formal challenges and duels were conducted, not in the tea room but on the ground where the stakes were genuinely real. A samurai issuing a challenge, or accepting one, followed an elaborate protocol of correct address, correct timing, and correct conduct toward an opponent he might kill within the hour. This wasn't decoration layered on top of violence. It was the discipline that kept violence from collapsing into simple cruelty, the deliberate insistence that even the man you were about to fight deserved the specific, unwavering standard of respect, right up until the moment the fight actually began. Strip that discipline away, and what's left isn't a purer, more honest version of combat. It's simply combat with nothing restraining it. Musashi's own conduct before Genryojima, which we've covered in an earlier video, is worth revisiting through this specific lens rather than the strategic one. Arriving late was a calculated insult, not a lapse in manners, and the fact that it registered as an insult at all tells you how seriously the underlying standard of correct conduct was actually held. An opponent who genuinely didn't care about politeness wouldn't have been provoked by its deliberate absence. Kojiro's fury at being kept waiting only makes sense inside a culture where correct conduct toward an opponent was assumed by default, which is exactly what made its calculated withholding such an effective weapon in the first place. Nitobe roots the deeper virtue in something well beyond surface manners, modesty and genuine regard for another person's feelings, with outward courtesy following as an expression of that regard rather than standing in for it. A correctly executed vow performed without any actual respect behind it isn't a lesser version of the virtue. It's an empty motion wearing the virtue's clothes, and Bushido treated that kind of hollow performance as close to worthless regardless of how correct it looked from the outside. This is also where the virtue connects directly to self-control, a topic covered in its own dedicated video on this channel. Holding genuine respect toward someone actively trying to provoke you, insult you, or kill you requires exactly the same discipline as holding your temper under any other form of real pressure, the gap between what you feel and what you actually do, sustained deliberately rather than collapse in the heat of the moment. A samurai who could maintain correct, respectful conduct toward a mortal enemy had already demonstrated a level of composure that made every smaller, lower-stakes test of the same discipline look easy by comparison. It's worth being precise about what this virtue never asked for, because the distinction matters more today than it did in feudal Japan. Bushido's politeness was never conflict avoidance wearing a nicer name. A samurai correcting a genuine wrong, or standing his ground against a real threat, wasn't excused from acting simply because acting might be uncomfortable for the other party. What the virtue demanded was that the confrontation itself, however necessary, be carried out without contempt, respect for the person even while opposing what they'd done, rather than treating the conflict as license to abandon regard for them entirely. That's a considerably harder standard than either extreme. It sits between, neither hollow courtesy that avoids the hard thing, nor honesty stripped of any remaining respect for the person receiving it. It's worth adding one more layer of nuance here, because the dual etiquette example only shows the virtue applied to a single, formal, high-stakes encounter, and Bushido's actual demand extended considerably further than that. The same standard was expected in the small, low-stakes, entirely unwitnessed interactions that made up the overwhelming majority of a samurai's actual day, how he addressed a servant, how he treated a merchant with no standing to complain, how he behaved toward someone who could offer him nothing and threaten him with nothing in return. A code that only governed conduct during formal duels would have been a much smaller, much less demanding thing than the one Nitobe actually describes. What made it a real virtue rather than a specialized professional courtesy was that it applied everywhere, all the time, regardless of whether the interaction was ever going to matter to anyone else. There's a specific reason this made politeness genuinely difficult to fake convincingly over any real stretch of time. A performance of respect, disconnected from the actual regard underneath it, tends to sleep precisely in the moments that carry no audience and no consequence, exactly the low-stakes daily interactions just described, where a merchant or a servant or a stranger with nothing to offer becomes the only witness to whether the virtue was ever genuine at all. Bushido's real test of this virtue was never the formal duel, impressive as that setting looks in retelling. It was the thousand small, unwatched interactions that never made it into any story, where nothing beyond a man's own standard was ever going to catch him falling short of it. Applied practically, the test worth running on your own conduct is the same one this code applied to armed men who could have ignored it entirely and paid no real price for doing so. Does your regard for other people's scale with how much power you actually hold over them, or does it run in the more common, opposite direction, generous toward whoever could retaliate, careless toward whoever couldn't? Bushido considered that second pattern the actual failure of this virtue, entirely regardless of how polished someone's manners happened to look in the specific rooms where displaying them was already convenient and cost nothing. That test is harder to pass honestly than it first sounds, precisely because the people least likely to notice the failure are the very people the failure is happening to. Nobody keeps a private record of every small moment of carelessness extended toward someone with no power to object, which is exactly why the pattern survives so easily unexamined. Bushido's answer wasn't a system of external accountability to catch it. It was the same internal standard running through every virtue on this list, holding yourself to it precisely because nothing else reliably would. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Twice a day, we bring you Bushido straight from the source, the real words of the man who wrote the code down, and the real warriors who lived it.